My father told me I didn't have the mind for it. He said it the first time at the kitchen table when I was 15, when I slid a folder of architectural sketches across the surface toward him and waited. He said it again at Thanksgiving when I was 17 and told him I had applied to Cornell's architecture program. He said it loud enough for his business partners to hear at a company dinner the summer before I left for college, while my brother Daniel stood beside him in a blazer that had been pressed specifically for the occasion. My father said I was creative, and he meant it the way people mean it when they want to say something is small. He said Daniel had the instincts. He said Daniel had the head for numbers, the patience for pressure, the kind of judgment that built things meant to last. He said the family business needed a certain kind of person, and that I was a different kind. He was right about one thing. 7 years after I packed a single bag and walked out of the house on Birchwood Lane, a company called Callaway Development Group sent a desperate proposal to my desk. They were begging my firm for a partnership. They needed us to save a project that was collapsing. What they did not know was that the firm they were emailing was mine. What my father did not know was that he was about to walk into my building. I want to tell you how I got there. But to understand the meeting, you have to understand the 15-year-old girl who sat at that kitchen table and watched her father look at her sketches for 3 seconds before closing the folder. I had drawn those plans over 4 months. The summer I turned 15, I found a book on urban architecture at a library sale, the kind of book with a cracked spine and dog-eared pages from someone who had loved it before me. I read it in 2 days. Something in it felt like a language I already knew without realizing I had been speaking it. I started sketching layouts, first rough, then precise. I borrowed drafting tools from a neighbor who had studied engineering. I measured our backyard and drew a scaled renovation plan with drainage adjustments and load-bearing calculations I had taught myself from YouTube tutorials and a second-hand textbook. By August, I had a folder of 12 drawings, each labeled, each with margin notes in my own shorthand. I carried that folder downstairs on a Saturday afternoon. My father was at the kitchen island with coffee, going over project files for Callaway Development, the residential real estate company he had built over 22 years. Daniel was sitting across from him. Daniel was 18, broad-shouldered, already being introduced to contractors and site managers. He was being educated the way you educate a future. I set the folder on the island and said I had been working on something. My father looked up from his files, held up one finger, finished the sentence he was reading. Then he opened the folder. He turned 3 pages. He didn't lean in. He didn't ask what scale I had used or how I had calculated the load distribution or where I had learned the notation. He closed the folder and looked at me with the patient expression of a man explaining something obvious. "This is a hobby, sweetheart. Architecture is about numbers under pressure and deadlines that cost real money when you miss them. Daniel has that. You've got a good eye. That's a gift, just a different one." He slid the folder back across the island and returned to his files. Daniel was looking at the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The folder sat between us for a moment, the pages still neat, the labels still precise, and then I picked it up and went back upstairs. I replayed that conversation for years, not because it was the cruelest thing he ever said to me, because it was said so gently. The cruelty was in how little it cost him. That Thanksgiving, I told the whole table I had applied to Cornell. My father set down his fork and said Cornell was a fine school, but that he had been talking to Daniel about coming on at Callaway full-time after his business degree. He said this at a table full of relatives. He didn't ask what I wanted to build. He didn't ask about my application. He mentioned that a colleague's daughter had gone to an art school in Savannah and done something in interior decoration and seemed happy. I understood what he was communicating. Interior decoration, something contained, something that couldn't threaten the plan. I got in. Full merit scholarship. I told my mother first, in the kitchen, early morning before anyone else was up. She sat down at the table and held both my hands and cried the quiet way she cried, with her jaw tight and her eyes blinking fast. She said she had known since the backyard drawings. She said she had always known. Then she dried her eyes and started making breakfast, and my father came downstairs and I told him at the counter while he poured his coffee. He said that was impressive. He said Cornell had a strong program, He said he hoped I had a plan for after because architecture was a tough market and he wasn't sure it was a practical, and then his phone rang and he answered it and walked out of the kitchen. He never finished the sentence. I didn't need him to. The years at Cornell were the first time I understood what it felt like to be in the right place. I was good. Not just good the way you're good at something you enjoy. I was the kind of good that made professors stop mid-critique and look at your boards longer than they looked at anyone else's. By my junior year, I had a thesis project forming in my head that I couldn't stop working on a mixed-use urban redevelopment concept for post-industrial neighborhoods, combining affordable residential design with commercial infrastructure and green space integration. It was ambitious. My thesis advisor, Professor Weston, called it the most commercially viable student project she had evaluated in 15 years. She said it could actually be built. She said I should protect the documentation carefully. My father did not come to my graduation. He sent a card with a check for $200 and wrote congratulations. Proud of you. Call if you need anything. My mother drove 7 hours alone from Indianapolis to watch me cross the stage. She sat in the third row and held a sign she had made from cardboard and a blue marker. My name in block letters with a star. I found her after the ceremony and she held my face in her hands and said, "You are going to build something extraordinary." I believed her. In the unsteady way you believe things when you want them badly enough to be afraid of them. That evening, I drove back to Indianapolis with her. My father was at the house when we arrived. He met me at the door with a one-armed hug and said he was sorry he couldn't make the trip. A site inspection had come up that couldn't be moved. You know how it is. He said we'd have a celebration dinner that weekend. He said Daniel had just been named VP of Development at Callaway and that the announcement had gone over well with the staff. He said Daniel was doing great. He said it in the voice he saved for things he was proud of. I sat in my old bedroom that night, on the edge of the twin bed I had slept in since I was 8. My thesis drawings were in a tube on the desk. My diploma was rolled inside it. The room was exactly as I had left it for Cornell 4 years earlier. The drafting tools were still on the shelf. The library book with the cracked spine was still on the nightstand. My father had not moved anything. Whether that was care or indifference, I never decided. At 1 a.m, I opened my suitcase on the floor and packed in the dark. Clothes. My laptop. The diploma tube. The charger I could not afford to forget. My mother had given me $200 in cash before dinner, and I put it in the interior zipper pocket of my bag. I had $800 total. I took my drafting tools from the shelf. I left the architecture book. Some things you carry forward differently than objects. I rolled the suitcase into the hallway. The house was dark. The heating system clicked. My mother was at the bottom of the stairs in her robe, standing very still, the way she stood when she had been waiting. I had not heard her come down. We looked at each other across the dark entryway and did not speak for a moment. Then she opened her arms and held me for a long time. Her grip was steady, not panicked, the hold of someone releasing something they love on purpose. When she pulled back, she looked at my face carefully, as if she were cataloging it for a time when she would need the memory. She reached into the pocket of her robe and pressed something into my hand. A folded note and a business card. She said, "This is for when you're ready." I told her I didn't know when that would be. She said she knew. She said that was fine. I walked down the porch steps in the dark. The June air thick and still. Fireflies over the front lawn. The street empty. I did not look back. I had learned by then that looking back at the thing that is shrinking behind you costs you something you cannot afford. I went to Chicago. I found a sublet on the north side, a room in a 3-bedroom apartment shared with 2 other women I found through a Facebook group for post-grad housing. I got a job doing drafting work for a small commercial architecture firm in the Loop, $9 an hour, the kind of work that required precision and offered none of the creativity that had made me want to study architecture in the first place. I took it. I worked from 7 to 4 and spent evenings refining my thesis project in the corner of the apartment kitchen, a cup of coffee going cold beside my laptop. Headphones in. 3 weeks after I arrived, I found the business card. I had been looking for a pen in the inner pocket of my bag, and my fingers found the note my mother had pressed into my hand at the bottom of the stairs. I had put it there and forgotten it in the logistics of moving. The card was ivory, minimal, one name, Patricia Cole, Principal, Cole Meridian Capital, a Chicago address. I read the note. It was written in my mother's handwriting on a piece of notepaper from the kitchen drawer. 5 lines. I believe in you the way I always have. This money is from the account your father doesn't know about. The woman on this card was my college roommate. I have been holding on to her number for 4 years because I always knew this day would come. Call her. I love you. I sat on the edge of the kitchen chair for a long time, holding the note and the card, and the $200 I found folded into the crease of the notepaper. That was $400 in total, hidden from my father, held for years, handed to me in the dark on a front porch in Indianapolis. My mother had been waiting for me to be ready longer than I had been. I did not call Patricia Cole right away. I put the card in my wallet behind my license and told myself I would call when I had something real to show her. 8 months later, I had a full commercial development pitch, 12 slides, real cost projections. A pilot program scoped with a neighborhood association in Pilsen. I sat in my car in the parking garage below my office building, and I thought about every person who had told me the idea was too ambitious, too early, too student project, too much for someone my age without a network behind her. I thought about the folder of sketches I had slid across the kitchen island at 15. Then, I pulled out the card and dialed. Patricia Cole answered on the second ring. Her voice was precise and warm at the same time. She told me to meet her Thursday at a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue. She said to bring the pitch and to be ready to answer hard questions. She said she had heard my name before. I did not ask from whom. I was already writing down the address. She arrived before me and was already seated when I walked in. She was in her early 50s, dark blazer, reading glasses she didn't need on a chain around her neck, the posture of someone who had been comfortable in her own authority for a long time. She shook my hand and told me I had 10 minutes. I pitched in 9. When I finished, she was quiet for long enough that I counted my own heartbeat. Then she asked 2 technical questions about phased financing and zoning variance timelines that told me she had been in this field for 20 years and was not interested in being impressed by language. I answered both directly. She looked at me the way someone looks at a thing they already decided on before the meeting started. I have one condition, she said. Whatever you build it under your own name, not your family's name, not anyone else's. I want to see what you can do when you have nothing to stand on but the work. I agreed without hesitation. I had already been standing on nothing else. Meridian Development Consulting launched in a co-working space on the near west side with 2 employees, me and Marcus Webb, a structural analyst I had met at a continuing education seminar who had been looking for exactly the kind of company I was building. We worked long hours for small contracts. A neighborhood association redesign, a municipal affordable housing feasibility study, a commercial corridor revitalization plan for a suburb that had hired 4 consultants before us and rejected all of them. We did not reject the work. We showed up and built things that lasted. 3 years later, we were 42 people in a real office in River North, and our flagship urban redevelopment framework had been licensed by 2 city governments. The concept in that framework was the same one I had developed at Cornell, refined and made real through 4 years of actual implementation. By the time I turned 32, Meridian had been valued at $800 million. I read that figure in a trade publication while eating a sandwich at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon and felt something I had not expected. Not elation, not vindication, stillness. The quiet that arrives when you finally become the thing you were told you couldn't be and realize the telling never actually mattered. Marcus knocked on my office door that morning and set a coffee on my desk. He had been with me since the co-working space. He was the closest thing to a partner I trusted completely. He said good morning and set a printed email beside the coffee. His face was neutral in the way it went neutral when he thought something was about to require careful handling. This came in overnight, he said. I flagged it because of the project. I looked at the printed email. The header read, Callaway Development Group, Indianapolis. My hand stopped moving on the desk for 1 second. Then I picked up the email. The language was professional. It was the language of a company trying to sound stable while asking for help with everything. Strategic partnership inquiry. Shared development expertise. Complementary market positioning. Attached proposal. 15 pages. Signed. Daniel Callaway, Chief Operating Officer. My brother's name. My father's company. I did not open the attachment immediately. I set the email down and walked to the window. Chicago in October. The river below catching gray light. I pressed 2 fingers against the glass and thought about the last time I had been inside the offices of Callaway Development. I had been 22 years old, and I had sat across from my father at a conference table in their Indianapolis headquarters and laid out a revised version of my thesis project and proposed we develop it together. He had listened. He had been kind. He had said it was impressive and that he could see a real future for an idea like this, but that Daniel had the company moving in a different direction and the timing wasn't right. He had offered to connect me with a colleague who was doing lower-scale residential work in the suburbs. I had thanked him, driven back to Chicago, and never proposed anything to him again. I went back to my desk and opened the attachment. I read the way I read everything, looking for what was wrong. The numbers confirmed what the language tried to hide. Callaway's flagship project, a mixed-use urban development in the Fountain Square neighborhood of Indianapolis called the Birch District, had been stalled for 14 months. Permits had been delayed. The anchor retail tenant had pulled out. The residential presale numbers were 20% below pro forma. The financing structure required a strategic partner with demonstrated urban redevelopment expertise and an established municipal relationship network, or the project would miss its window and default on its construction loan by the second quarter of next year. My firm had those relationships. My firm had that expertise. My firm was the reason those municipal relationships existed. Then I opened the architectural specifications section of the proposal. Page 9. The design framework for the Birch District. I read the first paragraph and something inside my chest became very still. The phased integration model, the green corridor overlay, the community anchor placement within the residential cluster, the specific approach to balancing commercial density with pedestrian scale. I knew this framework. I knew every line of it. I had written every line of it in a thesis document submitted to Cornell University in the spring of my senior year. The document Professor Weston had told me to protect carefully. I closed the proposal. I opened my desk drawer and found the Cornell thesis binder I kept there, the one I had brought from Chicago to every office Meridian had occupied since the co-working space. I opened to the framework chapter. I read the same paragraph from my own document beside the Callaway proposal. The structure was identical. The vocabulary was different enough to obscure the origin if you weren't looking. I had been looking at this framework for 10 years. It was mine the way your own handwriting is yours. You know it because you made it and nothing else feels the same. I set both documents side by side on my desk and sat very still. My brother had taken my thesis proposal. Or someone at Callaway had taken it. The same proposal I had brought to my father 8 years ago, and he had returned without interest. The same project he had said wasn't the right direction. His company had been building on my foundation for over a decade, and now that the foundation was failing, he had sent a professional email asking my firm to come in and save what had been built on my work without my knowledge or credit. I called Marcus in. I told him I needed full due diligence on Callaway Development. Financial audit, full design documentation review. IP analysis on the Birch District framework. Everything by end of week. He looked at the 2 documents I had placed side by side on my desk. His eyes moved between them carefully. He said, "This is your thesis." I said, "I know." He said, "Callaway has been using it." I said, "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How do you want to play this?" I told him I wasn't sure yet. I told him to pull the due diligence and let me think. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my apartment 2 miles from the office and looked at the ceiling and thought about what my father had said the night of the dinner with his business partners. That I was creative, that I had a good eye, that it was a different kind of gift. A week later, I called the contact on the Callaway proposal. I said Meridian was interested in a meeting. I gave them a date. I asked that the full senior leadership attend. I asked them to be prepared for a full presentation of the Birch District project. The contact confirmed. I asked her to use only my first name and title in the correspondence. Maya, CEO. No last name. No company biography. No photograph. The day of the meeting, I arrived at my office before 6. I had chosen what to wear with the deliberateness of someone who understands that how you enter a room shapes what happens inside it. dark, navy suit. Clean lines. A single piece of jewelry. A watch I had purchased the year Meridian crossed 500 million. My hair was shorter than it had been when I left Indianapolis. I was dressed the way I dressed for the meetings that mattered, and I had not dressed this way for my family since the night I had sat across from my father at the Callaway conference table at 22. I had been dressed then the way young people dress when they want to seem older. I was 32 now. I was not trying to seem anything. I stood at the window in my office for 10 minutes before the meeting. I looked at the city, and I thought about the drafting tools on the shelf at Birchwood Lane, and the library book with the cracked spine, and the folder of 12 sketches I had carried downstairs at 15. I thought about the graduation stage, and the third row, and my mother's sign with the block letters and the star. I thought about the note folded into my bag that I hadn't found for 3 weeks. Believe in yourself, even when no one else does. Marcus came to the door. "They're here," he said. "All 3. Your father, your brother, and their VP of Finance. They're in the lobby." I nodded. "Give them 5 minutes, then bring them up." I was standing at the head of the conference table when they walked in. I had not sat down. Standing was intentional. My father entered first. He was older than I had allowed myself to imagine. His hair was fully gray now, where I remembered dark brown threads mixed in. He was thinner. The jawline was still sharp, but something in the way he held himself had changed. A slight compression at the shoulders, the posture of a man carrying weight he could not put down. He was wearing a charcoal suit and a blue tie. The same kind of suit he had worn to every important meeting I had witnessed from childhood through the dinner where he announced Daniel's VP appointment. The suit of a man who was serious about what he was asking for. He extended his hand. "Thank you for meeting with us on short notice. I'm Robert Callaway, founder and CEO of Callaway Development Group." He shook my hand firmly. His grip was the same. I had shaken that hand for 32 years, and I knew the pressure of it the way you know your own pulse. He did not know whose hand he was holding. He looked at me with the professional attentiveness he deployed for strangers. Warm, engaged, slightly hopeful, nothing more. Daniel stepped forward. He was 35. 2 years older than me, heavier than I remembered, the kind of broad-shouldered confidence that hardens differently in men who are never made to question it. His handshake was brisk. He made eye contact and moved on. He did not linger. My brother looked at me the way he had always looked at me, with the surface attention of someone to whom I had never been the most interesting thing in the room. He saw a CEO in a navy suit. He did not see his sister. He had never looked closely enough to see his sister. The absence of recognition was not a mystery. It was the logical conclusion of a lifetime of looking through me. The VP of Finance introduced herself and sat down. I indicated seats and we settled. My father presented. He was good at this. He had built a company by convincing people to believe in things that did not yet exist, and he had the voice for it. Measured, patient, with a practiced pause before the figures that mattered. He spoke about Callaway's 30 years in Indianapolis real estate, about the Birch District's vision for urban revitalization, about the alignment between Callaway's community-centered design philosophy and Meridian's track record in mixed-use development. He said community-centered design philosophy as if it belonged to Callaway, as if it had not been developed in a dorm room in Ithaca by someone he had told wasn't built for this. Daniel presented the operational overview. He was less polished than my father but more specific, the way younger executives are specific, compensating for the depth they don't yet have. He showed the phased development timeline. He showed the pre-sale numbers. He did not volunteer the 14-month delay or the anchor tenant departure. He showed the design framework document on the screen, the one with the language I knew because I had written it, and described it as Callaway's proprietary development methodology. The word proprietary sat in the room like a stone, and no one but me heard the weight of it. They finished. My father clicked to the final slide. He clasped his hands on the table and looked at me with the expression of a man who needed something he was not accustomed to needing. I did not speak immediately. I let the silence hold. I had learned in years of negotiation that the person who fills silence first gives away something they can't get back. I let it extend past comfortable. I watched my father's hands tighten slightly on the table. I watched Daniel glance at the VP of Finance. Then I pushed back from the table and stood. I walked to the window, stood with my back to the Chicago skyline. I was standing, they were sitting. "Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Calloway. Your company's situation is serious. The revenue compression, the stalled timeline, the anchor departure, these are not issues that resolve through partnership terms alone. They require transparency on both sides." He nodded. "We are fully prepared for transparency." I held his gaze. "Good. Because before we proceed, I need to make a disclosure that is directly relevant to the terms of any agreement." The room changed. Daniel set down his pen. The VP of Finance looked up from her notes. My father's expression shifted. Not to fear, not quite, but to the particular alertness of someone who senses the ground moving before they understand why. I let one more second pass. "When I was growing up," I said, "there was a house in Indianapolis on a street called Birchwood Lane. At that house, there was a kitchen island where a 15-year-old girl once set down a folder of architectural sketches and waited for her father to look at them. He looked for 3 seconds. He said architecture wasn't for her. He said her brother had the right kind of mind. He handed the folder back. My father became very still. That girl went to Cornell on a merit scholarship," I said. We developed a mixed-use urban redevelopment framework in her thesis that her advisor called the most commercially viable student work she had evaluated in 15 years. The girl brought that thesis to her father's company when she was 22. He returned it without interest. The next year, a design framework appeared in Calloway Development's internal documents. The framework shared its core architecture, its phasing methodology, and its community anchor placement model with the thesis document submitted to Cornell University by one Maya Calloway in the spring of 2016. She looked at my father. "I am Maya Calloway." The silence was total. My father did not move. Not a shift, not a breath, nothing. He looked at my face the way a person looks when the mind is doing emergency work, pulling patterns from memory and laying them over the image in front of him. The jawline, the eyes, the crease between the brows he would have known if he had ever looked carefully enough. I watched him recognize me. Not all at once. In pieces. The way a shape emerges from a photograph when you stop looking for what you expected to see. Daniel was white. His hands had gone flat on the table. My father said my name. Just my name. Maya. As if testing whether the word still worked. As if the word had been locked in a room for 9 years, and he was opening the door and not certain what he would find behind it. I had prepared for many versions of this moment. I was prepared for denial. I was prepared for anger. I was not fully prepared for what I saw, which was a man who had just understood the full weight of a thing he had been not understanding for a very long time. "Here are the terms," I said. "I will not let Calloway collapse. Not because the company deserves to be saved, because 81 people work there and they didn't make the decisions that led to this table. Meridian will acquire a majority stake in the Birch District project and provide the strategic partnership necessary to close the financing gap and restore the pre-sale timeline. The design framework will be attributed correctly, in all public documentation, to its original author. My father will retain his title and his legacy in the company history. He will have no operational role in the partnership. He will, if he chooses, have a conversation with his daughter that is long overdue." Daniel sat very still. I looked at him. "You had 3 initiatives of your own at Calloway in the last 5 years. I've read the reports. 2 of them were good ideas with poor execution. The third was genuinely strong. You have more ability than you've had room to use because you've been standing in a shadow that was cast by someone else's decisions. I am offering you the chance to work under a different structure. If you want it, that is an offer, not a requirement." Daniel looked at his father. My father was still looking at me. I waited. Then my father picked up the pen. "I won't tell you it was clean after that. Nothing is clean after 9 years. The acquisition papers took 3 weeks to finalize. The first dinner, my father flew to Chicago and we sat at a restaurant on the river and spoke carefully for 2 hours. He was honest in a way he had not been honest with me when I was young, because the cost of honesty had finally become lower than the cost of performing certainty. He told me he had found my thesis in the Calloway development files 18 months after Daniel joined the company. He told me he had known whose work it was. He told me he had told himself it was not being used, only referenced, and had continued to tell himself that until the referencing became the foundation of his flagship project and the lie had become too structural to dismantle. He said he did not know when the lie had started feeling like a choice, and when it had simply started feeling like the truth. He said that was not an excuse. He said he knew whose voice had been missing from every strategic conversation at Callaway for a decade. I don't know if I forgive him. That is not the kind of thing that resolves at a dinner table in Chicago. What I know is that I said I was leaving the door unlocked and that he was responsible for earning whatever came next. I said it the way my mother would have said it. Not with anger. With the precision of someone who has decided to measure the distance carefully before she crosses it. Marcus told me once that the moment a company becomes real is not the moment it gets valued. It's the moment it saves something that would have been lost without it. The Birch District opened 12 months after the acquisition. 81 Callaway employees kept their jobs. The design framework was attributed in the project documentation to its original author. I stood at the groundbreaking in Indianapolis in a hard hat and a jacket that still smelled like Chicago, and I looked at the site, and I thought about a drafting book and a folder of 12 sketches and a 3-second glance across a kitchen island. My mother was there. She had flown in from Indianapolis, and she stood beside me in the cold November air with her collar up and her eyes bright, and she did not need to say anything because I had her note in my coat pocket, the one with the card and the $200, the one that started with, "I believe in you." I had carried it in every coat I owned for 9 years. She looped her arm through mine, and we watched the first concrete pour and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "I told you you'd build something extraordinary." "You were right," I said. She squeezed my arm once and did not let go. People ask me sometimes what it feels like to prove someone wrong. I think they expect it to feel like winning, like the moment the final score goes up and the crowd is loud and everyone who doubted you can see the scoreboard from where they're sitting. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like standing in a cold November field watching concrete go down, where something you imagined used to be only paper and ink and a late night in a dorm room, and understanding that the people who told you it was just a sketch never had the capacity to see what you saw. Their failure to see was not a judgment on what existed. It was a measurement of how far they could see. My father was at the groundbreaking. We stood 20 feet apart for most of the morning. At the end of the ceremony, he walked over and stood beside me and looked at the site. After a moment, he said, "Your advisor was right. It was the most important thing he ever said to me, and he knew it, and I knew it, and we did not look at each other when he said it. I didn't know the right thing to say back. So I said, 'I know,' and that was enough. I still work early mornings when the building is mostly quiet. I like the hour before the rest of Meridian arrives, when the decisions belong only to me and the city is still gathering itself outside the glass. Some mornings I take out the folder I kept from Cornell, the one with the thesis drawings, and I look at the first page, a 15-year-old's first real plan. The notation is messier than what I draw now. The scale is slightly off on the eastern margin. The concept is exactly what I have been building ever since. I put it away and I go to work. There is still so much to build.